The New York State Division of Human Rights is so excited to celebrate the Juneteenth holiday by highlighting New Yorkers that embody the mission of our agency. The individuals that we'll be highlighting really have dedicated their lives, their careers to promoting equity. And on Juneteenth, we are so pleased to bring their work to all of the people of the state of New York.
New York was the first state in the country to pass a human rights law in 1945, and our mission is eliminating discrimination, remedying injustice, but most importantly, promoting peace, justice, and dignity for all.
I am the co-founder and farm director at Soulfire Farm, and we are an Afro-Indigenous centered community farm that's dedicated to uprooting racism and seeding sovereignty in the food system. We grow food and medicine using our heritage practices that actually make the earth better than how we found it, and also provide this nutrient-dense, life-giving food to the doorsteps of people who need it most in the community, survivors of food apartheid.
What exactly is food apartheid, and how are you working to combat it at Soulfire?
Absolutely. So food apartheid is not a natural phenomenon. A lot of people call it a food desert, but there's nothing natural about a system of segregation where your zip code is the leading determiner of your life expectancy, where your zip code determines whether you have fresh food in your neighborhood, and also whether you have quality schools, whether you're going to be exposed to gun violence, whether you're likely to be incarcerated. And so it's that system that says that, a white person is 4 times more likely to have a supermarket in their neighborhood. It's the system that says if you're a person of color, you're much more likely to have diet-related illness like kidney failure, heart disease, many types of cancer, even mental illness, because you just don't have those heritage foods that your great-grandparents grew up with and that are what your body really needs in order to thrive. And we are working both directly to combat that by doing those doorstep deliveries, but also working on some of the systemic issues around housing discrimination, around laws that prevent investment in Black and brown communities and that make it very difficult for farm and food entrepreneurs to feed their communities.
I study what we call underdeveloped neighborhoods and look at strategies on how we can bring them into, improve them, transform them, and turn them into great places to live and work. For me, it's about trying to understand the relationship of the past to the present. And the future is uncreated. It hasn't happened yet. So by understanding the connection between the past and the present, this gives us the power to shape the kind of future that we want, and then to fight for the realization of that future in real time.
I am Dr. Ann Bailey, and I am director of the Harriet Tubman Center for Freedom and Equity. And one of the key things we're doing right now is we're developing a freedom trail in Binghamton, New York. Because as it turns out, Binghamton, New York, quietly as it's kept, was a stop on the Underground Railroad Trail. And there was quite a bit of anti-slavery activity going on in upstate New York. And we just want that to be a part of our branding. And if I can say this, that one of the reasons why that's important is because when people do not see themselves in this progressive way, it's very easy for some to go down a rabbit hole of hate, go down a rabbit hole of disrespect, go down the rabbit hole of a real, just, a sense of feeling of disconnection to your neighbor. And so what we want is for people to feel connections with one another. I hope people will think more about how we tell the story of our communities in our state and across the country, how we bring out those hidden stories, as I've mentioned, of activism, whether it was the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman and all these wonderful figures who are not dead figures. They should not be. They should be figures that we think about as continually inspiring us to do better. And so that it's not something that's just about history, but it's also historical preservation and it's public history. Remember when George Floyd was murdered, all across the country, people were ripping down Confederate statues. We may remember that there was this they were a target in real ways, and they still are. And after some of those statues came down, some of us have still been there to say, what goes up now? How do we represent ourselves? If the Confederate statues do not represent who we are as a people, how do we represent who we are as Americans? So we're going to do our part with our Freedom Trail in Binghamton, but we would like to inspire a whole lot more around the country. And who knows who else will inspire around the world, as we always have.
You've called yourself a creative steward.
Yes.
Of
this nation's memory.
Of this nation's memory.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about, how that describes your work?
What I find exciting about doing public art, that I'm telling stories that haven't been told before. These are marginalized people who have been kind of kept on the fringe of the American narrative. And so now you get a chance to tell the truth. You get a chance to enlighten people.
Right.
And I think it helps to foster cross-cultural discussions, dialogue. This is what it's about, learning about other people. We now have a heightened awareness for the need for diversity in public art. The Yonkers City Council Majority Leader announces that she wants to see a memorial to enslaved Africans. I came up with the idea of doing 5 people, a man who is a boatman, because this is the most highly prized enslaved African. It's the guy who drove the boats across the ocean and back. An elder woman, because all people were enslaved too. Children, most of the children who were brought by Frederick Phillips, who was the slave trader here in Yonkers.
Right, here in Yonkers.
Most of the people that he brought were really young. And then, of course, a beautiful woman. And so that was the idea for the Enslaved Africans Rain Garden, and making people understand the need for a public artwork like this, because it should be representational, figurative.
Right.
It cannot only be conceptual. You're going to have, because Black people haven't seen themselves represented very much in this medium in public art. So that it's important to do it, again, with a certain measure of care.
The New York State Division of Human Rights, our mission is similarly, to uphold justice and equity and to remedy, injustice. Our way is through the human rights law, and your way is, through reclamation of the land and, the ancestral practices and, passing on this incredibly empowering information, to the people. Do you find that, in urban communities, the young people are a little averse to farming? Do young people make that connection that farming and slavery were, synonymous? But, and how do you experience that when you're working with young people?
The trauma that Black folks have inherited from so many centuries of oppression, land-based and otherwise, has led to a level of internalized racism where so many of our young people don't see that they have a future worth investing in. Can't imagine anything beyond incarceration or being killed by the gun. Can't imagine value beyond being a consumer, because there's been so much messaging dehumanizing Black and brown people. And we have found, anecdotally and almost unintentionally, that relationship with the earth and with our ancestors, who we as Black people believe live in the earth still and speak to us, has an incredible capacity to compost that trauma and turn it into hope. So young people who come here and they see possibility with this narrow lens suddenly are widening and widening and being like, oh wow, well, if folks who look like me and like the music I like could build their own house and start a business and heal the community, what could I do? And that spark is reignited. And so we have this goal of connecting folks to land, to their ancestors, to Afro-Indigenous spiritual tradition, and to their own capacity to realize their destinies.
So one of the other things that is the genesis of the division reaching out to talk to you about your work is Juneteenth and the celebration of the holiday, and really looking back, understanding where the holiday came from, why we celebrate, and then looking forward. the continuous exercising of that freedom and the expansion of that freedom.
I think that it's marvelous that we have a holiday like this, again, because it's about cross-cultural education, balancing the narrative.
The battle and our victory over slavery. No one gave Black people their liberation. We got it the old-fashioned way. We earned it. We earned it on the battlefields. We earned it with our blood, sweat, and tears. We earned it by ensuring that the North would win that battle. Without the Black slaves and freedmen, the North could have never, ever defeated the South. Juneteenth represents the heart and soul of a people yearning to be free and remembering the greatness of yesterday.
In some ways, Juneteenth was initiation, it was the beginning. And so the path to liberation is long. And I'm so grateful to my mother for walking alongside Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And working on voter rights. I'm so grateful to my great-great-grandparents for leaving sharecropping and figuring out how to purchase their own parcel of land. And grateful to my ancestors even further back for resisting being kidnapped and forced into the bowels of slave ships. And so the journey is long, but I think that we get to simultaneously celebrate those steps of liberation and remember that still our folks don't own lands, are not in positions of power in corporations and government at a level of representation that matches our demographic, right? Are still not able to access the nourishing foods that we need in order to thrive and to participate at full capacity in civic life. And so there's a yes and, there's a celebration and hopefully a motivation to continue working.